What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. I'm joined once again by National Bodybuilding Champion Jack Thorburn, and today we are also joined by co-founder of Revive MD, co-founder of Raw Nutrition, and owner of Camp Jansen, Matt Jansen. Fellas, how we doing today?
Awesome. What's up, guys?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Guys, it's a pleasure to have both of you on. For the fans of the podcast, you'll be familiar with Jack. We had him on recently to discuss his most recent off-season. And I wanted to expand upon that conversation because I think we touched on a lot of extremely relevant points when it comes to bodybuilders trying to maximize their potential in this sport. And ultimately, we want to get Matt on as well because I think for the most part, there is kind of a disconnect when it comes to the enhanced and the natural side of the sport. And I think ultimately there's a lot to be gained from each other, especially because there are such bright minds on both ends. You're both accomplished coaches and accomplished athletes and share a similar philosophy, I think, when it comes to a lot of these points. And for that reason, I think this is ultimately going to be an extremely productive conversation for the bodybuilding community at large. So to start this thing off, another common similarity with each of your backgrounds is you both sustained a pretty major injury in your lifting career. So to begin, I want to just get a general outline of your injury, the recovery time, and any lingering issues to this day that stem from that injury. Jack, could you kind of start us off here?
Well, I had quite a few. But that was more from like a rugby as like a sport background. So when I was doing the both. But then I'll talk more about the one that I mentioned in the last podcast in terms of it wasn't necessarily like a trauma kind of injury. It was more something that developed from a postural issue over years. So it wasn't anything that kept me out of the gym, but it certainly hindered my progress. And if anything, I regressed during that time because essentially I couldn't train the way I wanted to. So I was always working around. So it was like sub-maximal loading. And like when I could, it was maximal, but that was few and far between. So it's like psychologically, it was an issue because I was in the gym. So it wasn't even the fact that I wasn't in the gym, but I was in the gym, but I couldn't, despite putting everything into it, I still couldn't gain what I thought I could from it. So that was a very frustrating time. But at the same time, I knew that it would come to an end and I would sort of get through it. And I knew that it was just a matter of sticking to it. Because realistically, I could have just stopped training and then waited for it to pass over that way. But then I'd have had more to gain back. So basically, I just kept hold of what I could, really. Even though it was a long time, I'm still not over it completely. But I'm with sort of 3 years deep into it. So, but I feel like I'm in a pretty good place now with it, sort of getting over it. But I know, obviously, Matt, yours is more of like an acute trauma. So do you want to enlighten us on yours?
Yeah, sure. And just Jack, I don't know. So what exactly was your issue?
So I think I've got sort of like a predisposition to tight hip flexors around that area. And I somewhat ignored it, but I didn't know about it really. So it tugged on my posture because my hips were displaced because of it. And just playing sport for years and years, I was always pulling my hamstrings and we couldn't work out why. I had quite significant testing done on them in regards like strength tests and stuff like that. But we could never get to the bottom of it. And ultimately it came back to the tight hip flexor thing, which I didn't actually find out for another probably 5-6 years from when I was having all the hamstring issues. So
Okay.
by that time, it played havoc on basically the whole of my skeletal system. So my spine was slightly off, which obviously then resulted in shoulder, neck, and as a consequence, certain muscles within my body had become shortened. Some were lengthened, like more than usual. So some weren't as strong as they should be. Some were overcompensating. So, which basically led to motor recruitment and stuff like that being all over the place, and things were taking over the role of other things and others weren't working at all. So one day my body just said to me, we're not doing this anymore. Like, long story short, I walked into the gym, tried to contract my hamstrings on a hamstring curl, and I couldn't feel a single thing. I couldn't feel any contraction at all. And that was just like one day it happened. And then it just, like, the whole of my body felt like that then. And I couldn't feel contractions for a very long time. And it just took a lot of osteopath work, a lot to try and sort of get me back. But the problem is, because I was in that compromised position for so long, I'm always going to be tugged back to it. So it's just staying on top of it now. It is a hell of a lot better than it was. So I'm very thankful about that, but it's taken a long time and a lot of effort for that. So.
That's interesting, man. I don't even know if you guys expected me to say this, but I literally verbatim could say pretty much the exact thing that Jack just said. So I've had two issues going on. One started at the end of 2016, which is still going on today. It started with me. I was doing a heavy hack squat. I did a set of 5. My last rep, I just had so much force on the way up that I kind of hyperextended both of my knees. So I damaged the fat pad in both of my knees. And then through that process, I initially tried to train through it. And then I took some time off. But within that, I set something off in my hip. So the issue within my knee that was, just an acute inflammation issue in my knee moved up to my left hip. So since like early 2017, I've had an issue with my left hip, which caused, basically, like Jack said, like I never stopped training, but I would be in the gym and I would basically train to the point of straining a muscle every time I trained. So basically I would warm up super slow. I would try to push the load up super slow. And then eventually, like, there was no predictability. Sometimes it could be 3 plates on a hack squat. Sometimes it was 7, so like I never knew when it was going to go. So I trained like that all 2017. I trained like that all 2018. In 2018, I competed at USA's. I knew it was a hindrance to me. I had atrophy in the leg. My left leg, actually, cosmetically, before the injury, was my better of the 2 legs. But I had atrophy in my upper sweep, so I just tried to hide it as best as I can when I was posing. So what it essentially boils down to is, in 2019, I had an MRI of my hip. I had an MRI of my knee. I had a hematoma coming out of my hip, so just a lot of bruising and blood. And then I had grade 1 injuries in 4 different muscles: glute minimus, med, and then lateral quad, and then somewhere else. So there was 4 grade 1 injuries. So basically, through me not being able to train in the right pattern, I just kept straining something. So I've been working with John Quint, who is a brilliant mind. And what he's basically assessed is that I just don't have any rotation within the hip joint. And so for like us advanced athletes, all we do is we just compensate to get the motor patterns, but yet my hip joint's not rotating properly. So I've been working on that. So that's, and what's been so frustrating to me is now getting into the pec tear. I thought all this time off would help my legs, but honestly, it's done the reverse, because of all the laying down, of all the sitting, my hips are now worse than what they were before the pec tear. So I thought in my brain this whole time, okay, I might not be able to train my upper body, but I'm going to be able to train my legs hard, and I'm not. I can't, so that's been frustrating. But as far as my pec, for those of you guys listening that don't know, I completely ruptured my pec from the insertion on June 15th. I had surgery on June 25th. Surgery went very well. I went into that surgery process. I had some very good friends. Matt Berzicott had tore his pec. Another really good friend of mine, Cade Zook, tore his tricep. So like, those are kind of my confidants in the surgery process of like, I reached out to them right away, told them what happened, but I purposely didn't ask them about their surgery process, because I didn't want to go into with like negative connotation or in a negative mindset. But on my own, I very much underestimated how intensive the surgery was, and like how I felt after. I mean, I basically, with my own clients, I told them that I had surgery on a Thursday. I told them I needed Thursday off of work, and I told them I'd be back to them by Friday afternoon, which I stuck to. But the state that I was in for the next 10 days, like, I never expected to be that bad. In terms of just my energy levels, in terms of the fact that, like, I could sleep 18, 19 hours a day. Obviously the pain medication was making everything worse. It was dulling the pain, but making me feel worse. So there was a lot of expectations that I definitely underestimated. And then the other challenge post-surgery that I've had, which is still going on through today. So basically my pec rolled to like a little bit further than the midline of my chest. So they had to unroll it. All that unrolling caused a lot of trauma in and of itself and caused a lot of inflammation. So post-surgery, everything looked really good for the first 7 days. And then on day 7, I started getting a lot of swelling in my upper pec, to the point by day 9 that my wife and I thought I might have an infection, because it was just like a hard red rock-like spot up here. And then I started running a fever. So by day 10, I was back in the doctor, and the doctor looked at me and he said, yeah, that's just inflammation from, that's fluid buildup from the trauma that you went through. He said, you're okay. Just continue to ice it like you are. So I went back home that day and I iced it. I literally got up off the couch, put the ice pack in the freezer, went and sat back down, and the fluid burst out of my incision. So on July 6th, I had this burst. And then since July 6th, I've been working on reclosing my incision. And I think part of the issue is it's like right here in my armpit. So like the skin itself is just softer. And then not only that, I've had atrophy, obviously. So now you have soft skin that's also loose skin. So it's been a monster to try to get this thing to heal properly. So that's obviously delayed my therapy, because like stretching modalities and stuff, like I can't really do because it stretches out the skin. So that's been the most frustrating part. Like, the surgery was hard, but I expected that. I didn't expect how hard it was, but that's surgery in a nutshell. But like this, like delayed process of not being able to progress even on a small scale, or being able to like throw my boys around or play with them as I want to, like that's been the hardest part. Because at this point, my pec feels fine. It's just like the incision that's caused me so much issues up to this point. So
when it comes to injury, acute trauma is one thing. It's going to derail our progress for a period of time, but then ultimately we'll recover and we'll get back to the gym. But when it comes to a lingering injury that ultimately is around for years and affecting the way we can train, I think there's a significant psychological toll there. Ultimately, as bodybuilders, we identify with our training, and even more so, we identify with our level of effort in the gym and basically outworking our competition. And perhaps each of your responses can tie into social media as well, because I think that is an added pressure when you can see everyone putting in the work every single day. Meanwhile, you're on the couch or you're in the gym and not able to give 100%. That can be pretty taxing. So with that in mind, Jack, start us off here. In regards to your lingering injury preventing you from doing what you want in the gym, can you kind of touch on the potential psychological toll and maybe how social media could make that even worse, or perhaps alleviate the issue to some degree?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, really, that I've built up a sort of persona on social media in terms of like my intensity in the gym, etc. So for me then to not be able to replicate that for a prolonged period of time was not only for myself, just because obviously we're all here because we love to train hard. So even within ourselves, not being able to, that's hard enough. But I know ultimately you shouldn't really care about what you put across, but you still like to be able to be seen to be training hard. No one wants to watch you doing a sort of sub-maximal set of an exercise, you know what I mean? But I think for me it was a matter of, even if I have to do these sub-maximal sets, I know it's going to benefit me down the line in terms of that I will get back to being able to do these maximal sets. It was almost damage limitation. So like I mentioned, I could have sacked off training. There were times when I felt really bad, and I just even bad about the way I looked because I'd regressed. but I knew that I'd probably have regressed even more if I did what I felt like doing and sort of just stopping. So I think, yeah, there is an added pressure from social media, but like ultimately it's your life and it's your progress within the sport. So you can't really let that dictate, because ultimately no one understands what you're going through personally unless they've experienced something very similar themselves. And if they have, they'll have 100% sympathy with you. If anything, they'll probably have more respect for you because of that.
Matt, your thoughts on how a lingering injury could impact your mental state?
Jack just nailed it. I mean, so let's just talk about my pec tear. My pec tear hurt. It was traumatic. The sound of when it tore, like it literally sounded like a shotgun going off in my ear. But like as soon as I got past the fact that, okay, I know 100% my pec is torn, which was literally as soon as I got the bar off of me, it was so much more emotionally hard on me than physically. You know, like the physical aspect, like I can endure anything physically, but the emotional aspect, okay, of knowing, like all these thoughts just flood through your head. Like, am I ever going to be back to what I just did? Is this going to heal properly? You know, all the progress that I've made for the past 10 years, I'm just going to literally just watch it vanish to some extent. Like all these thoughts, like were just like flooding through my head, like as soon as it happened. And thankfully I had one of my best friends here who, is a martial arts, he's a pro in karate. So he tore his Achilles and he also tore his ACL. So he was like through his training. So he was kind of there to like ease my mind a little bit. But there is like, you know, I've built my entire reputation around hard work, you know, and I've built my entire reputation around like not wasting your time doing what's looks sexy and, you know, like really basing it off of what really matters. You know, and if you just talked about social media, so just a social media impact from my injury, I went from, so basically I was training 2 days on, 1 day off, that kind of rotation, 1 day on, 1 day off. I went from 10 to 12,000 views a day on my story as people looked forward to watching my training to now I have about 2,000 to 3,000 views a day. So like I know like so much of what my social media drive is how I train, and people want to see that and people want to relate to that. So yeah, I mean there definitely is struggles. And then, you know, in terms of the injury itself, and you know, like Jack said, like it's hard, especially when we desire to train hard, to go in and do sub-maximal work. I mean, it's almost like it goes against what you believe in. You know, like it's very hard. It's more mentally hard than it is physically hard, just because it's like you're left not empty, but you're left knowing that you could give so much more, and that's the struggle, you know. So again, like I mean, Jack really hit it on the head, but just to, like I said, I wanted to give that perspective of what happened to my following, and I don't base my self-worth off of that, but I mean that's very quantifiable, you know, going from 10 to 12,000 views a day to 2,000 to 3,000 simply because the training is missing. That's huge.
And I know, like ultimately you've established yourself now, Matt, so you don't really need to be putting out these sort of hardcore training videos, but obviously it does benefit you to a degree. But sure, for someone, for example, myself, you know, I do gain monetary value through sort of social media interaction. So for me then, like there were times when I thought, oh, like my income will drop because of it. And then if you look at it from like a professional bodybuilding standpoint, that must be incredibly detrimental to them psychologically and physically, you know, when you take that on board.
For sure. Yeah.
Jack, you mentioned something pretty interesting there that I want to explore further. And sticking to this theme of social media, Matt, when I last had Jack on, we ultimately came to a soft conclusion that there are some people in this industry who their decisions in regards to their nutrition and training are highly influenced by social media, and perhaps a lot of people are putting a limit on themselves in the off season when it comes to their body composition, because they want to fit this perceived look that you're supposed to have as a physique athlete, and people won't push their body weight to an extent that perhaps they should if they want to make the most amount of progress possible. I'm super curious, considering you coach some extremely high-level athletes who bodybuilding is their job. They make the most of their income through their training and being an ambassador for different supplement companies and their posts on social media. And for this reason, Is it that these people have more to lose by letting their body composition go in the off season because they are reliant on social media for their income? Or is it that these people are so dedicated to the sport that they will do whatever it takes to make the most amount of progress possible?
Well, I would say that within my main crop of guys, I'm very fortunate that their driving force is ultimately winning and not social media perception. I'm very fortunate with that. Like the guys that I work with, the guys that we could just name off really quick, like all they care about is winning and what it takes to win, and that's really, it's replicated in every part of every aspect of their life. But social media is a huge, just source of just all sorts of things. Everything that you just mentioned, people not pushing their body composition enough, people pushing their body composition too much, people basing their exercise selection off of what their favorite pro is doing. I mean, I made a post on that this morning. Like, the people that you're watching and even nutritionally, like I made this mistake early. Like when I tried to eat like Evan Senapani when I was 160 pounds, at 18 years old, and I just got fat and I didn't understand why. Like the metabolism, the metabolic impact of the muscle that he carried, like that just went right over my head. So there's so many things. One of the things that really drives me nuts on social media is these posts of, I saw such and such do this movement today, so I figured I'd throw it into my workout. Why? Like, if that's not a part of your plan, then it doesn't matter, but then on the other end of the spectrum, there's so many, social media influencers that's their entire goal, is to post something new that nobody's ever seen, whether it's effective or not, every day on social media. But to get back to your original question, I try to talk about Dallas a lot because he was somebody that meant a lot to me and somebody that was obviously so impactful. But social media did impact his decision-making process a lot, in terms of the stress. And that's something too, like, obviously now with Nick, I just try to remind him every few days. I'm like, dude, just keep your blinders on, because I know, like, at the rate of which his social media influence is growing, like he's getting attacked, he's getting praised, he's getting offers, he's getting all these things thrown at him all the time. And right now he just needs to be laser focused in and not let any of it affect him. Good, bad, indifferent, like don't take the praise and don't take the criticism. Like you just stay in your lane. But again, I want to give credit to my guys. Like my guys, they do what they need to do because it's what they need to do. They're not making their decision-making process off of Instagram. Even like right now, like if you look on Nick's Instagram and you scroll back to January, December, I mean, he didn't look that pretty. He didn't care. Now he looks like a freak. I mean, he looked like a freak then too, but with a rounder face and, I mean, you guys get it.
I think the draw to Nick as well is his absurd strength. So it links back to what myself and Mike were talking about. Some people do a really good job on the fact that if it's off-season time, even if they want to stay relevant within the social media realms, it's more impressive for you to be putting up your absurd lifts and training. People will respect that a lot more than if you worry about if you've got abs in your off-season, whereas if you're dumbbell pressing 200 pounds, which is what Nick did a great job of.
Sure.
Matt, I couldn't agree more with what you said there. It drives me nuts. As you mentioned, a lot of these influencers, and you'll note like there's a daily workout every day, and it's always a different workout. And there's just so many issues with this, and I think there's a lot of people being misled in terms of what actually drives progress. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't post your workouts. We all post our workouts. But the thing that I think is important is that if you look, months back in our social media, you'll see the same workout, but maybe with some different reps and load listed there. And that's super important. To dive down this rabbit hole a little bit further, Jack, considering you are someone who is at, a very competitive level in natural bodybuilding, can you discuss how social media can potentially influence your training and nutrition decisions in regards to the exercises you're picking, the diet you follow, I think there are some people, I mean, Matt even mentioned Dallas here, who is at the top of the game. They can be influenced by others who are at a similar position in the sport as themselves. And they might not, succumb to any exercise or any nutrition plan posted by anyone. But when they see people who, maybe outplace them at a last show or place just behind them, they might be influenced by those people specifically. Can you touch on that potential impact?
Yeah, so for example, if you see a competitor who has a sort of standout body part, potentially something that you aspire to achieve, you may look at, what do they train? What exercises do they use for that body part? What rep scheme are they doing, etc., etc. But then again, you're not factoring in things like their genetics. That might be their dominant body part. For example, people ask me quite often like what I do for my quad workout, right? And I've had a lump over my knee since I was about 10 years old. So I've always had quads. So I'm potentially not the best person to ask. So there is that. So people always go after who's, they ask Phil Heath what his arm workout is. So that's one thing with social media. But I think nutritionally as well, if someone's making a lot of progress all of a sudden, so this quite often goes down to people when they coach hop as well. People like someone will go to a new coach and they'll be making quite a lot of progress. So then they're always asking them, well, what have you changed with their diet? Quite often it's not anything drastic really, but they're always looking for what's the secret ultimately. That's what it always comes down to. Like quite often social media, they're always seeking for the secret or what they don't know, but quite often what they don't know is just hard work really.
Matt, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, when it comes to seeking out information, you really should be looking to the guys who are showing the progress in their own physique that went from a bad body part to a good body part. I mean, that really is, I could think of some guys, but taking something that's genetically elite and also like Jack said, you don't know what they're good at. You don't know what their success has been. You also don't know what their recovery looks like. I mean, there's so many variables that need to be considered, and it's more so than, hey, what are you eating or how are you training this? And then obviously the supplementation side of things is there too. Like we can't just sweep that under the rug. So, when it comes to these things, it's like take the guys that have really proven the groundwork and then ask them. And a lot of times it's common denominators, and it all does boil back to execution and effort. I mean, really. And execution in everything that you do, consistency in everything that you do. It's not just, that's something else. Like talking about Nick and Sean and Brett, like, three guys that I have that are popular right now. What I want to encourage people with is they're perfect, like every single day. Like I don't think Nick has seen the inside of a restaurant more than 5 times in the past 4 years. Because that's the level of expectation that he holds himself to. Brett Wilkin, I tell that guy to go eat more than he even eats. I know metabolically he can handle it, but he would rather just be precise. And that's, I respect that. Same thing with Sean. Even this past week, Sean's metabolism right now, his prep for the Olympia is just through the roof. I told him to eat on Saturday. He messaged me in the morning and said, hey, I have a wedding that's going to go late, so I'll just hold off on eating. And I said, no, absolutely not. And even at his level of maturity as an athlete, he still thinks that he needs to earn his food. And there's not this inverse relationship of metabolism and work. Like once you've consistently put in the work, the metabolism's there regardless. Like it's not on a day-to-day basis. So I'm getting off on a rabbit trail, but that's just kind of further thoughts on that.
Very cool. I think that actually segues quite nicely into our next topic, which is off-season length. And in terms of the natural community, it seems to become more widely accepted that you need to take an extended off-season if you want to make significant progress, probably 2 years at a minimum, depending on your training age. And part of this is just when you come out of contest prep as a natural, you probably got a good 6 months just to get back to like a really productive state hormonally. When it comes to the enhanced side of the sport, it seems a bit more popular to utilize a shorter off season. And I'm curious as to your thoughts for why that is. I think a potential confounder here is when you're talking about the elite level pros, there's probably just some pressure to compete every year to maintain their status, but also is a year just sufficient to make adequate progress for these guys? Considering perhaps there might be a quicker rebound out of prep and stuff like that, or do you think that, you know, all things considered, probably most guys could benefit from a longer off season than what's typically used?
That's a good question. So speaking just, I'll talk about myself, and then I came, you know, obviously from a natural background, and that was where my upbringing came. And I honestly, I don't ever think that I've lost that mindset, even on the enhanced side when it comes to my off seasons. Like I really, really want to show, and I know my progress is now expedited, but I want to show like markable progress. You know, so even within myself, like I competed in 2016. I didn't compete again until 2018, and that was for no other reason than I wanted to show that progress. My plan was again to compete this year in November, which is 2020. Obviously, that's not going to happen now, but like that was the trajectory that I was on, you know? So like that mindset of me that was instilled in me as a natural athlete due to the benefits, I've never lost that. And even though I have variables now that I can push the progress faster, like I still think that that's a necessary amount of time. Now, transitioning to the pro side of things, I don't know if the word is pressure, more so staying relevant. And I don't mean relevant in the eyes of social media. I mean relevant in the eyes of judges. I do think that you need to show yourself every year. And there's very few cases where if you might have been awarded a pro card and might not really have a pro physique, that's not your fault, but it depends on who shows up at that show. In those situations, I would still do the extended off seasons. But for most of these guys, I really think it's important that you're showing your face often, and then within showing your face, showing progress. And that doesn't always have to mean muscle. It could also mean how you're presenting your physique. It can mean conditioning levels that you bring yourself in at. Those are things that also need to be weighed as a professional, you know, like improving on all aspects of being a professional when you're on stage. So yes and no. Like I do try, especially with my younger guys that turn pro. Jorge out of Mexico is a great example. Brett Wilkin, another great example. He's making a transition from 212 to the open. So we're really being, like, to be honest with you guys, I think he could do the New York Pro next week and be top 4. But the goal isn't to be top 4. The goal is to win, you know? So like, we're going to continue our process, push his weight up another 6 months, and then we're going to look to probably diet down after that. But once he steps on stage, then I think it's important that he consistently steps on stage, you know, to get that recognition, to be put up against guys and to be compared. Another thing that's important is you want to be compared to the top guys. You want to get those pictures. You want to be able to look at that and see what it looks like, and then go back to the drawing board of what you need to do next in the process.
Jack, anything to add there? Any questions potentially?
There is potential that the politics within bodybuilding do play a role to a degree, in the fact that you do, like Matt said, you need to be turning up to these shows. The judges need to remember you and see that you are making significant progress, not necessarily against other people, almost within yourself as well. So you're improving your condition, you're improving size. So there is an element to that as well. Like over here, there are only two significant natural federations really, and you compete. You're normally you're one or the other. So if you build a name within that, because everyone's going for that natural pro card within, similar to the enhanced route, everyone's going for that pro card. You keep turning up within that same federation, improved every time. Quite often your hard work is rewarded. But at the same time, you have to be up at that level already. So we go back to what Matt said. A lot of these guys are already at the top level. So do they really need to be making that much progress? So I think that's why a lot of these people don't take these extended off seasons, because they have essentially what they need. It's more about like minor tweaks in what builds. They don't need to take the sort of 2 years to make massive jumps. And remember, with a lot of these pros as well, if they're staying out of the limelight for a whole year, you know, a lot of supplement companies wouldn't be happy with that really. So, and that is what it boils down to ultimately. Even myself, and nobody really. I have felt the pressures of the supplement company that I'm associated with to compete. I'm very lucky that I've managed to stay relevant somehow, taking a 3-year, going on 4-year off season. But I think only now it's sort of coming to fruition, the sort of progress I've made, and people are seeing that. I think people are a lot more understanding of the off season now, especially over here, Matt. I don't know what it's like over with you. The off season is becoming a bit more sort of popular and cooler over here, so people appreciate it a lot more. So you can still maintain your sort of status within the sport whilst in an off season.
Yeah, I mean, even like you said, like it's transitioning from physique pictures to training content. I mean, if you can keep the training content going, you could say, I mean, now with social media, like there's no excuse to not be relevant. I mean, I love Gary Vee. I think a lot of things that Gary Vee says, like we need to be applying. Like he's got that thing about making 64 pieces of content in one day. Like it's honestly, I've held back not saying this, but I'm honestly disappointed in the bodybuilding culture as a whole throughout this whole COVID period, because we just went through a period where we had no live television for months and bodybuilders didn't capitalize on it. Why? I have no clue. I mean, seriously, like the stage was theirs to take it and just run with it. And a lot of them did nothing, like absolutely nothing. Now, I know in certain situations, maybe they were training and maybe they weren't allowed to show where they were training. I get all that. But more often than not, like a greater majority of us could have done something to further the sport at a time where the stage was ours. I mean, like there was nothing going on to pull any attention away from whatever we want to show.
Yeah, great insight from both of you. Jack, you mentioned some potential differences between the scene in the States compared to the UK. And I thought that was something extremely fascinating that we discussed in our prior conversation. Matt, we talked about the UK bodybuilding scene, specifically the natural scene, seems to be becoming more and more intertwined with the enhanced scene in the UK. Specifically, Jordan Peters has been doing a lot of great stuff over there.
Sure.
There seems to be this meshing of training styles between these athletes. These athletes train together. I'm not exactly up to date on the relationship in the States, but from my understanding, I feel like there is a bigger disconnect between both sides of the sport here. Have you seen anything?
I would say for sure there's a bigger disconnect here. And I got to give credit where credit's due. All the guys that I work with in the UK, the culture over there is the training culture is just better. For a greater majority of you guys, like you guys just simply train harder, period. I mean, you do. And I think a lot of that has to go back to, I mean, the influence that Dorian still has on y'all's culture is just massive. And then not only Dorian, you guys basically have two guys. You got Dorian and Flex. And they're both like, I mean, they're both at the top of the game. And obviously Flex doesn't train like Dorian, but guys, I've trained with Flex during an Olympia prep. The intensity that he brings is second to none. I can tell you that. I mean, I did an arm workout with him that, I mean, it literally felt like a leg workout. Like that's how hard it was. So, that culture of just hard work, is just kind of like beaten into you guys. And not only that, but you guys respect it so much that you want to replicate it. Whereas over here, we have so many different champions that got there so many different ways. There's like a plethora of how to get there and maybe some confusion within that. Now, relating it back to like the natural, and I don't know why there's the spread. I think maybe a lot of it has to do with the lack of understanding within the culture of dieting. So like, and it's not so prevalent now, but I would say like 2010 through 2013, like the If It Fits Your Macros crowd was just a little obnoxious. And I would say a lot of the hardcore bodybuilding culture just wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the reason why there's still this divide now. I would say that probably has something to do with it, but I was on a podcast a few months back, and I think in a greater majority of ways, especially when it comes to training, like if the enhanced crowd took their training as serious as the natural crowd did, because honestly, the natural crowd is so dependent on that progress. I think the enhanced crowd would be much further along than where they're at right now. You know, I mean, so many enhanced bodybuilders, they just base their entire training philosophy off of whether they got a pump in the gym. I mean, that's it. You know, there's no connecting of the dots. There's no direction. There's no goals. It's just, let's see how big of a pump I can get today, and then let's try to replicate that again tomorrow. And if it doesn't happen, I got to get a cheat meal. You know, like something's wrong. So I really think that if a lot of the community as a whole gained more of its training insight and setup based off of what the natural community is doing, there'd be a lot of benefit there.
Yeah, Matt, and I think you're doing an awesome job of trying to change things on that side of the sport in terms of training and where your mindset should be, and utilizing the bread and butter movements a little bit more often, keeping things consistent. So, perhaps from the other side of the sport, I can say that I really appreciate what you're doing, because I think the more we learn from each other in this industry, the better all of us are going to be. Jack, would you agree with those notions from Matt, and basically that the UK trains harder than us?
No, I think it's just part of sort of UK culture that we've always been a nation where, obviously, a very small nation. So we put our we're proud of how much we can do considering we're such a small nation. So it's always hard work. So I think that's what it comes down to, that people, the British bodybuilding community sort of prides itself on hard work. I think that's what it comes down to. We can't ignore the influences of Dorian. I think everyone has sort of a picture of him somewhere. And then obviously now at the moment, we've got pioneers within the sport now. So I know Jordan's not a pro, but then we've got people like James Hollingshead, incredibly strong. We did have Luke Sandow. So you've got those two. And then going back to what
incredibly strong too.
Yeah.
Freaking strong.
If we go back to what Matt said about potentially if the enhanced community would adopt some of the principles that the natural scene takes on in training, I think that's where the UK mixes well, in that a lot of the enhanced bodybuilders now are that meticulous with their training, potentially above that as well. So they've taken on board how meticulous the natural scene were with their training, and they've taken that on, and potentially even more so. But I think that's where we sort of intermingle really well. I think, Matt, you are correct in terms of over in the States where there was that divide. It was almost like a cult divide when they brought out the whole "if it fits your macros." I can remember it didn't catch on quite as much over here, but it was quickly disbanded, I think, really. But I think that had definitely played a role over there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating, this concept, because I agree. I mean, from what I see, I think the work ethic, the utility of a performance mindset, it's a bit better in the UK. And you kind of mentioned the history of the nation there, Jack. I think it's fascinating that there is a difference, because there is, this whole thing in America about pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And, if you put in a bunch of work, that is going to linearly have a linear relationship with the effects you get. The work you put in will ultimately determine your success. But I
something
think
else I just want to add, like really quick too, that I noticed when I was over there, and what I've known is like y'all's trajectory in athletics from children is much more like a direct course. Like the goal that you guys have as kids is either to be picked up by a club team in the Premier League or to be picked, or rugby. Like that's it. And like like how hard you guys are pushed, and the desire of the parents and the kids to meet that goal is I mean, it's a huge part of your culture. Whereas over here, kids are more lazy. I mean, just to be point blank, like there's not that heritage of like wanting to be as good at one thing as possible as you possibly can, because there's so many more opportunities over here. There's so many more distractions over here. I mean, I love being in the UK, but like the distractions that we have in the US are way more than what you guys have. I mean, it's just like there's so many things that kids can do at all times, that it doesn't really create that like culture of success like you guys have. Like, I mean, I honestly don't think, I can't name one bodybuilder that I know out of the UK other than Luke. I don't think Luke played soccer or football. Every other person I know did. Like that's like been bred in you guys.
Before we wrap up this conversation, Matt, you touched on some critical points in regards to what potentially the enhanced side of the sport has to learn from the naturals, and maybe you have some other ideas we could expand upon there. But Jack, going to the other side of the coin, is there anything that immediately comes to mind that the natural community could learn from the enhanced side?
I think pushing the limits, I think, is one thing. Not so much within the past couple of years, it still goes on, but for a long time, the natural community threw around sort of comments like, oh, I won't push it, I won't do this, I won't do that because I'm natural. So they always limited themselves, or it was, oh, I can't gain that much in my off season because I'm natural. Whereas, so instantly they were sort of putting those limitations on themselves. They were confining themselves. Whereas, in the enhanced community, the sky's the limit. They're always pushing for more. They don't put a ceiling on what they can achieve. So I think in that regards, more people are coming around to that now, and they're believing that, potentially what the textbook has written for how much you can gain naturally potentially isn't true. So I think that's definitely one thing. Hard to think about, because over here that we're so interlinked now. We've adopted so many of the same principles. I know I always go back to him, but Jordan Peters has done a fantastic job in terms of, obviously I'm a member of his site as well, and just sort of the community that's built up. There's no sort of discrimination between the two. Questions are asked from both sides, answered from both sides. So, I think over here we're doing a really good job of mingling together. I will jump back on the nutrition side of it. I think a few years back, you would have never seen an enhanced athlete follow an If It Fits Your Macros plan. And that seemed to be incredibly popular for the naturals. So I think they often naturals go on scientific based things potentially too much, and once again limit themselves to what science says instead of just a bit more trial and error, whereas quite often enhanced, potentially not with the sort of supplement side of it, but in the training and nutrition, that they go a bit more by trial and error. So I think getting a blend of the two is sort of like a nice mix.
Yeah, brilliant. I think your main point there was critical. I see a lot of people in the natural and evidence-based side of the community kind of just becoming pessimistic in what they think they can achieve, and nothing matters. These variables like protein distribution or the macronutrient distribution, these are all just like small percentage of points that don't count to anything. And I'm personally
overly simplified.
Yeah, I'm personally not too fond of it. I'm not very fond of this idea that there is a genetic ceiling. Obviously, your gains are going to slow over time, but I think it's definitely plausible that due to these epigenetic changes over time from hard training and proper nutrition, that the ceiling probably incrementally gets a little bit higher each time. I don't think you're ever just going to bash your head through it and everything shuts down. Maybe once you get much older in the sport. But Matt, you touched on the training side of things and potentially the enhanced side of the sport, having to learn that from the naturals. Maybe you want to expand on that a little bit more. Or you have some other points that you think are pretty important to discuss.
I think kind of just to frame the same question, what can the natural community learn? Regardless of who I'm coaching, one of the biggest things that I try to do is I try to create the clearest picture possible in terms of the variables that we have, remove any cloudy details, and be consistent within those variables. So to me, my biggest issue with, without a set plan, with an If It Fits Your Macros plan, is all the consistencies that can be present. And it's not so much that it affects the end result, because I don't think that it does. But what I do think it affects is the mental psyche of the athlete, and then also their linear progress or lack thereof because of the changing of variables daily. So that to me is like, when I coach an athlete, it's my job to get them in shape, but it's also my job to keep them in a mental mind state that's going to keep that person healthy. So learning I would say probably some of the most unhealthy patterns, and this is my fault. This is nobody else's fault. The most unhealthy patterns I had as a bodybuilder was when I was natural and when I was following an If It Fits Your Macros diet. Because I was consumed with what I could eat on a daily basis and what I could fit in. And then I was also consumed with my progress or lack thereof and how many daily fluctuations I had in things like the scale, like my look. Whereas if you stay consistent within one plan, all that is removed. Like you're not fixated on your food. You're not fixated on doing math all day long. You're not sitting with your family at dinner and you're doing math calculations in your head the whole time. Like those things are so unhealthy, and you get so consumed by it that you don't even realize it. I mean, you're sitting down at a table with people for an hour and you have no clue what was just discussed because literally you're running math equations in the back of your head the whole time. And that to me is just unhealthy. And that to me, it doesn't have to be a part of bodybuilding. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, just to talk about the other side, I do think that through too long of one consistent plan, you can definitely develop food allergies and things like that. So that's where the benefit of changing your nutrients matters. But you have to be so mentally sound to be able to handle that and not let that control you, so there's definitely a balance there that needs to be achieved.
Awesome. Jack, anything to add there?
No, I think nail on the head, and things like that, just remove all the stress. I know you said about variables. You got the information from certain foods. People are worrying why they're a couple of pounds up different each day, and then they're consuming things that are causing a lot of inflammation that you might not even be aware of. So but then again, like Matt did say, you still don't want to limit yourself entirely to the same plan for years and years. However, I basically do, but so far so good. So,
gentlemen, that's all I have for you today. Brilliant conversation. I think this was extremely productive, and the audience is going to get a ton out of it. And this is a step forward for the community at large. Matt, for people who might not already be supporting you, where should they go?
Easiest way is my Instagram, which is Matt Jansen 8. I'm actually also launching my new coaching website today, which is thecampjansen.com. So I'm excited about that. And I'm more than happy to help, guys. And also, if you need a specific answer from me, the best way to get that is just to email me. My email is my primary way of communication. I get a lot of messages. I can't possibly respond to all of them. But if you email me, you will 100% get an answer back. Jack,
give the listeners a brief reminder of your information.
So most of mine's just on Instagram, Jack_Thorburn. My email is on there as well, which is just jackthorburn@hotmail.co.uk. So that would be anything. Once again, questions, normally I'm okay on Instagram. I'll probably get back to you. But any coaching inquiries, etc., through the email then.
And those links will be in the description. That does it for another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone.